Hello and welcome to Crosstalk. I'm Peter Lavelle. The Syrian opposition says it has reinvented itself and asked to be recognized as a legitimate representative of the Syrian people at home and on the global stage. What difference will this make? Will this new strategy change the course of the civil war? After all, it would appear Assad has considerable staying power. To crosstalk the Syrian civil war, I'm joined by Rim Turkmani in London. She is a spokesperson for the group Building the Syrian State. In Istanbul, we have Roy Gutman. He is the Europe bureau chief for the McClatchy newspapers. And in Colombia, we cross to Joseph Olmert. He is an adjunct professor at the University of South Carolina. Alrighty, folks, crosstalk rules in effect. That means you can jump in anytime you want. Rim, if I can go to you first in London, we have a new opposition group. They want to be recognized internationally and representing the Syrian people. What are their origins, and will it change anything on the ground?
I don't think it will change a lot on the ground. There is a feeling of optimism among the revolutionaries that at least there is now one united body. But personally, I don't think it's going to change much, and I don't think it's going to last for a long time as a strong group because it's a coalition, and coalitions are always weak. They fall apart in front of tough challenges, and the reality is that we are in front of very, very complex and tough conflict. There is no solution to unite around. You know, what are they exactly uniting around? There are no solutions. There is no political solution. There is no armed solution. So it's not quite clear what is on their agenda.
Okay,
and,
if I can stay with you, Rim,
sorry.
Let me ask you a question. Does it bother you that it took the United States, Hillary Clinton, and U.S. allies to say, we want a new opposition, snap, snap, go to Doha and get one? And they did.
Of course, yeah. I mean, this is why we're against, I mean, as Building the Syrian State, we are against such coalitions if they are being sponsored and supported mainly by one player of the international community. This is becoming an international conflict, and any solution has to be supported by all the players of the international community. There has to be international consensus. So any group that is now seen as a puppet group or something that is under the control of one particular player will not be able to carry the solution. And we wouldn't, as a matter of principle, we wouldn't join in to start with. For the same reasons, there was a conference we called for in Damascus when eventually it became a Russian project. We pulled out. We don't want to be under the Russian umbrella and neither under the American one.
Okay, Roy, if I can go to you in Istanbul, what difference is this new coalition going to make? Okay, as we've just heard on this program, it's sponsored by outsiders, by Western powers and the Gulf powers.
Well, I think you're right about the Gulf powers as well as the Western powers. Obviously, Qatar is a key player, not only because they're supporting things financially, but because they like to be a key player, and they have brought everybody together, and they've been there for at least a week, and maybe they're staying on for some more time as well. One thing I have to mention to Rim's point is that I believe early in December there's supposed to be a meeting of the so-called Friends of the People of Syria, which is more than 100 countries getting together, and I think that they will recognize these new groups and give them full, well, at least rhetorical support. Coming back to your question, though, about what difference does it make? Well, I think that there was a problem with the Syrian National Council that until certainly this past Friday, they really didn't have a very determined or articulate leadership. They didn't have a very good organization. They didn't seem to have a legitimate structure, and it was really chaotic. I think they've actually gotten much of their act together, or at least that was my impression from watching them. And the problem with their disorganization and the chaotic appearance they gave is that I think major countries who did want to make contributions to some part of the opposition, either the humanitarian side or the military side, felt that this was not a group they could really work with very well. They just didn't know who was who, and that group couldn't organize itself. Now, supposedly that has changed. I'm a skeptic. as is Rim. But that is the claim, at least, that they've... And look, already they've had the recognition of the GCC countries,
Right.
the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. The Arab League didn't go quite that far today, but they've made some initial steps that the Syrian National Council was never able to make.
Okay, Joseph, I'll be the contrarian here. I mean, they changed their name because some of the rebels are committing atrocities against the Syrian people, so they have to rebrand themselves, don't they? It's a media thing. It's a PR event. Go ahead, sir.
Well, Peter, first of all, thanks for inviting me. I find myself in more agreement with my predecessors than not, I must say, because I'll come back to your comment in a minute, but look, Dr. Turkmani is right and Mr. Goodman is right. There is not much change, you know. And the reason for that, there might be three main reasons. One of them is that this is a group that is composed mainly of exiles. I don't know how much influence they really have on the ground, which leads me to the second point. I doubt whether they have too much influence over the the rebel groups, the military wing of the opposition, those who are fighting against the Assad regime. And sometimes they commit atrocities, as you said. There's no question about it, and that's reprehensible, of course. And the third point is that the Kurdish element of the population, about 8, 9, or maybe 10%, mainly in the northeast of Syria, they are also having their own reservations about that, as they used to have about the SNC, the Syrian National Council. And of course, the Kurdish element means whatever is the Turkish involvement in that. So I believe that all this is still very tentative, and I agree completely with the assessment of Dr. Turkmani that we are in for a long conflict, and the tragic situation is that there is no way to determine it, to win it militarily or politically unless something very dramatic is going to happen. Now look, I must tell you, there's no question that atrocities are being committed by the rebels, but there's no question, of course, that most of the atrocities are being committed by the regime, whether the military or the Shabiha militia, and I don't think that at this stage of the uprising, or the civil war rather, one can really quantify exactly who kills more than whom. The tragic situation is that many innocent people on both sides are being killed. I'll tell you, look, if there is a car bomb in Damascus, that's a terror activity. It doesn't matter whether it's being done by the rebels or by the regime. So there's no question about that. Look, I'm not optimistic about this situation, but I must say very briefly something else. Previously in this program and also in my writings, I advocated a role for Russia in the solution of the conflict. And maybe now, after the American elections, it might be an opportune time for the Obama administration to try and reach out to the Russians in order to incorporate Russia in a solution that will allow a transition without Bashar Assad, while not removing completely in the first place also the Russian presence, so that the Russians will not feel that they are out of it and it is becoming yet another Western victory. I am not sure that now is not the right time for doing it. I didn't believe it could be done before the American elections. I happen to believe it may be more possible after the American elections.
Okay, Rim, if I can go back to you. I mean, the question is, and you never can figure this out from Western media coverage, okay, is just how popular is Assad? He does have support. He has a base. And the longer this goes on, the stronger his base gets, okay? Because there's this feeling that I get is that, the rebels are there to protect the people, but now people are dying because of the rebels.
Yes, but that doesn't mean that they're going to turn to Assad. I think the Assad's popularity is decreasing by the day, even among his strongest supporters, because he simply is not guarding their interests. He's not delivering. Every time we hear claims from him, he's going to put the country under control, everything will be fine, Syria is fine, and he's not delivering. So if I were a loyalist, I would say, well, you didn't deliver. And I wouldn't necessarily turn to the revolution, but I would be very disappointed in supporting such president. Reality is that increasing number of people are turning against Assad, but they're not necessarily finding somebody to turn to. And the international community is not helping as well by interfering with the opposition, by appearing as indifferent about the Syrian suffering. They're hiding their differences behind the divisions among the opposition. I don't buy the claim that the international community needed one united body in order to deliver. For example, Mr. Goodman said that they want one united body that they can deliver humanitarian aid through, but I mean, why do they need it? I mean, we have all these refugees in Lebanon, in Turkey, in Jordan. What stops the international community now from going there and help all these refugees? They don't need any political body. They don't need any international resolution, and they're not doing it. They are not doing it. The international community is
okay, this
very
is
short of
CrossTalk.
helping
Roy,
the
go
Syrian
ahead.
people.
Jump in. And
I completely agree with you. I was really just trying to recite what the internationals say. I think it's kind of phony. I think that they've been making excuses for a long time. The thing that's just happened, though, in Doha, and as you know, I was there covering it, is that the internationals have now run out of excuses. They cannot blame it on the SNC any longer. And I wanted to come back to the broader point that Peter was making about the opposition losing support. I think that that's kind of like a catchphrase, and that, you know, that people are flocking to Assad. I have a very hard time believing that.
I didn't say flocking to. That's going too far. Okay, go ahead.
Well, okay, or even gaining, because, listen, here's a president of a country, you know, who really didn't have legitimacy in the first place. I mean, he doesn't have a broad base and an election and a constitution. It's been a one-man show or a one-family show for 40 years. And the fact is their time is up. And so when people started on the streets with peaceful demonstrations, he brought in the army. He brought in the Shabiha. And now he's bombing the country to smithereens. I mean, this is a person who's not just lost legitimacy, but he's committing crimes on a very high order daily. And I don't think that, you know, and at this point so many Syrians have lost somebody, or they've lost their possessions, or they've lost their homes, that it's very hard to go back. And I think, coming back to Joseph's point, the question is, what can the international community do, and can Russia find some way to join in to bring this to a quick and a smooth and a peaceful
Okay, Roy, I'm going to jump
ending.
in here. We're going to go to a short break, folks, and after that short break, we'll continue our discussion on Syria. Stay with our team. Welcome back to CrossTalk. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're talking about the ongoing Syrian civil war. Okay, Joseph, I'd like to go back to you in Colombia. I mean, one of the things I read about the new coalition that represents the opposition, supposedly united, is that now they have the legitimacy to ask for more weapons. Is that going to solve serious problems, intensify the war, make the war worse? And no one's been able to convince me, just because if Assad did go, what would change? Go ahead, sir.
Well, first of all, we need to define what does it mean change. I mean, there's not going to be a peaceful democratic Syria anytime immediately after the removal of Bashar Assad, because even if he is out of Damascus, I still believe that he or people around him will try to fortify themselves in the Alawite mountains in northwest Syria. And that might be amounting to some kind of autonomy, at least for a transition period. And Syria might still be in a danger of breaking up, the Druze in the south, the Kurds, and so on. Look, all this can happen. It will not be good for stability in Syria, but also not for regional stability. I agree with you completely. But look, let's be honest about this question of arming the rebels. Everybody says now that it's terrible what's happening in Syria, but 6 or 8 or 10 months ago, everybody said if you will not arm the rebels, that is the best chance to prevent a full-scale, who knows what kind of atrocious civil war. The civil war, at any rate, has become what it is today. And thousands of people are being killed now, and nobody even counts the dead anymore. So if you really want to stop the war as soon as possible, you need to create some kind of a situation whereby the regime will not feel anymore that they have the military upper hand. Therefore, you need to arm the rebels. On the other hand, if you arm the rebels, you arm elements that are very, very dangerous. Some of them are Islamic militants and all the rest of it, and we know what can happen with it. So look, therefore I believe, and that brings me to what I said before, I hate to repeat myself, but also relating to what Roy Gutman said, if the Americans, and let's face it, they are the leaders still of NATO in the Western world, if they don't want to interfere in this conflict by way of, say, a military intervention of one kind or another, or they don't want to sponsor Turkish intervention, or don't want to encourage NATO intervention, they have to come to some kind of accommodation with the Russians, who are the ones who really support the Assad regime. And it can be done. I believe it should be done. And in that case, we can come to some kind of an end that will be not a total victory for either side, but will allow at least some kind of reasonable peaceful transition.
If I go to Rim, I mean, the problem is here is from, and I'm not speaking for the Russian government, but the Russian government's position is that, you know, they're not going to support regime change. Libya is on their mind, okay? And also, the Russians and the Chinese and other members of the international community. The international community isn't just the Americans and their friends, but everybody else is worried about Syria becoming a failed state. Unfortunately, they're not thinking about the Syrian people. They're thinking about a failed state in a very sensitive region. This is what it's gotten down to.
But, you know,
let me go to Rim first. Good. This is Crosstalk, but Rim first. Go ahead.
I don't buy this argument from Russia. I agree they should, you know, we don't want to repeat the Libyan scenario, but the Libyan scenario happened through military interventions. So what stops Russia from pushing for a political solution? If they don't want to see a failed state, then they should should sit on one table, have serious talks with the West and the US to find one political solution to find an exit for this regime. We don't have to focus on the names. It's not about the Assad himself. Even if he goes, the regime, you know, is there. The Syrian regime is the mukhabarat, or the security forces. So I would argue what Russia is doing right now by supporting the regime is what is leading to failed state, because it's also pushing the other sides to continue the arming.
Well, at the same time, we have examples of Afghanistan, we have Iraq, we have Libya. Always the law of unintended consequences. Roy, what do you think about that? I mean, these outside interventions simply don't lead to good results. Go ahead.
The biggest mystery when you sit around, as I did for several days, for more than a week there, in Doha and anywhere else you go to talk about Syria, the biggest mystery is what are the motivations that are leading Russia to basically block a solution,
Look,
which means
I
the
think
departure
it's very
of Assad.
clear. I don't think it's very difficult to figure out. Russia doesn't want to be in the position of leading from behind, watching the Americans change the geopolitical map of the world. Full stop. It's pretty simple.
The Americans are not leading either.
Very
Peter,
simple. Very simple. Roy, go ahead.
Peter, the Americans are not
please.
leading. The Americans are standing back and sort of hoping that somebody else will take the lead, because they don't want to get into a war in a Muslim country again.
My goodness.
And so the mystery is,
Peter, look.
Everybody
here is
knows
the point,
you
Peter,
want to
if
keep.
I may, please.
Go ahead, Joseph, and go ahead, jump in.
Here is the simple point. I mean, I think that you look at the American role in colors that represent the past, not the present or the future. This is the Obama administration. And I suggest you read
Libya,
what Thomas Friedman wrote in the New York Times.
Yeah, I see these colors. These are the colors I see it in, okay? It's very red. A lot of violence is used all of the time.
Look.
Go ahead, Joseph.
Look, let me finish, please. Libya was America from behind, and when it happened, Vice President Biden said, and he was right about that. It sounded like bragging, but he said, look, we invested in it less than $1 billion, not even one person was killed, and Gaddafi is out. So they know, and this is the point here, that it is not going to be like that with regard to Syria. That is why they do not want to do that.
Joseph, how do you know that? How do you know they know that? How do you know they know that?
Because I'll tell you how do I know that. I'll tell you how do I know that. I have three elements here that I can inject into the discussion. You may recall this interesting incident before the elections when President, at that time, Medvedev, met President Obama, and he whispered to him, leave it all after the elections, I'll be more flexible. He will be more flexible on many issues.
Yeah, that was on anti-missile defense, okay? It wasn't about Syria. It was anti-missile defense.
But that's part of an approach. Look, I'm trying to build a point here. I'm trying to build a case here. I might be wrong, but let me finish, please. The second point is, look back at what Thomas Friedman, who is a mouthpiece of the Obama administration, wrote about Israel and the Palestinian situation. He wrote, don't expect us to intervene. They are not going to do that. Obama has other priorities. That is to say, Obama doesn't want, President Obama, I should say, doesn't want to interfere where he knows that the stakes are very high and the chances of success are very slim. That leads me to the third point. He will have to come to some kind of realization that Russia has a role to play. And you need to play this card of the Russians, and the Russians will have also to make concessions. There will have to be a regime without Bashar Assad. He can't stay there and he will not stay there. And what do the Russians want? They want him to be removed, and then they would lose completely. So also
I don't think all of my guests here overestimate Russia's influence in the region. It doesn't have very much at all, okay? And international law does play a role here.
Maybe you should
the Libyan example plays a big role. Roy, go ahead.
Listen, the Russians do have influence. They have historic influence. They have a historic role. Russia is a major power. Russia should have influence. But right now, it seems to me, Russia is gambling its influence, and it's risking it by virtue of staying with a regime.
And the major powers are not doing the same thing? The major powers aren't doing the same risks?
I'm just talking about Russia right now.
I disagree with you.
Let's discuss Russia.
More
you can disagree with me all you want, but I'm telling you, Russia's position right now is one where I think they are putting at risk their long-term interest, their middle-term interest, and their short-term interest, because they are now backing a regime that is bombing its own people. This is not a good place to be.
I don't think Russia's going to be in a position to create a failed state. It doesn't want that on its hands. Rim, go ahead. Fair time.
I do agree with Goodman. I do agree Russia is gambling, and if it's really supporting this regime because the regime is supporting its own interest, I would say, well, listen, this regime is incapable of supporting its own interest. How is it going to guard the Russians' interest? It just can't. It can't do it. It can't deliver. I disagree that Russian position is motivated by the will not to have a military intervention, because the veto, all the Council resolution, Security Council resolution that they vetoed, they did not include military intervention. They were about political solutions, and actually they all parties agreed to the content of the solution, but it was arm twisting.
Does the opposition want to have negotiations with Assad? Rim, do they want to have negotiations? No. This is what Russia supports, negotiations.
I disagree. First,
absolutely.
Not true.
Because they get arms from Saudi Arabia, from the Qataris. They don't have to talk. They don't have to talk.
Peter, wait a second.
Finish your point. Go ahead.
There on the table. The negotiations were there on the table before the arming started, and the Russians never supported it with all their heart. They never supported it.
They were the only party that supported negotiations. My goodness.
Because they...
But Peter,
I know so many...
The only party on the international stage that supports negotiations, okay? Everyone else is a party of war. Every other party is a party of war. Joseph, go ahead.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Peter, you know very well.
Joseph, go, fair time.
Yeah, you know very well that politics and diplomacy is the art of the possible. So what did not happen in the past, let's leave to historians and to us commentators. But when you talk about policy making and the need to do something now and in the near future, I think that the Russians should feel very good that there are three people that didn't coordinate their position with each other. We all say that Russia should play a role. And the question is how to do it.
It's been denied a role. It has put things on the table left and right. It's written resolutions. Okay. But no, it has to come out of Washington, and it has to come out of Riyadh. That's not the way it should work. That's not the way it should work.
Now it's a new ball game, as they say here in America. It's a new ball game now. Obama was re-elected. He got a renewed mandate. This is a new ball game, and give it time, give it a chance.
Roy, jump in. Go ahead.
It's just this. So much has happened now in the last year. So many people are dead. You know, the official death toll is 35,000. It's probably triple that. The number of people who are now exposed to the elements or who could be thrown out onto the street any day, it could be millions of people. This is the government has helped destroy the country. It should never have come to this. Russia, which is the good friend of the Assad regime, should have told them, you do not do that. You must come to some terms with these people. And now so much has happened. So we have to deal with the reality as it is. And the reality as it is that the country is a mess. And Assad can never put it together, and he cannot be part of the solution. It's just that's just happened.
Okay. It's very interesting. The international community and Western powers should determine who should rule and who shouldn't. This is how we got into the mess in the first place. We've run out of time. Thank you very much, folks.
I didn't say that
Many
at all.
thanks to my guests today in London, Istanbul, and in Colombia. And thanks to our viewers for watching us here at RT. See you next time, and remember, Crosstalk rules.